Right now, you are looking at one of the youngest serial killers in human history and the youngest in the history of Argentina. This boy took the lives of nearly 4 children with his own hands. Moreover, the first murder was committed at the age of just 9. Sit tighter, dear ones, because this is scary. So the little girl in the photo is called Cayetano Santos Godino. Born into a wealthy family of Fiore and Lucia Godino in Buenos Aires, Argentina, on October 31st, 1896. Although Cayetano's parents were Italians, they could not find their place in their homeland and decided to move to a new continent in search of a better life. At the turn of the century, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world, attracting numerous immigrants from all over Europe. He was a small one, but with a very stubborn nuance, like my mole. Kate's parents were notoriously heavy drinkers, and surprisingly, did not change their lifestyle in their new location. The hope that everything would somehow work out after the move, it seems, did not come true. Little Kate grew up with her siblings in poverty and overall in a rather gloomy atmosphere. Their mother and father were often drunk and practically did not pay attention to their children. This is not the case when a close-knit family supports each other in difficult times. Even the children didn't get along very well with each other. After the loss of their 10-month-old son who died from heart disease, Fiora Godino became, among other things, often angry at her living children. The main target was little Cayetano, whom Mr. Fiora would periodically beat to near death. Of course, other family members, including Mrs. Lucia, were also affected, but Cayetano received the most frequent and severe beatings. Not least because he was beaten not just with a stick. His older brothers also constantly used the whip as Zappa was beating him off. In fact, they gave him the derogatory nickname Curly, which stuck with him for the rest of his life. And about this, let's say, aggressive family tradition, the world learned much later when we followed the already grown-up body of Cayetano Godino and saw dozens of scars on his body, most of them on his head. One more thing to note. Syphilis, which Mr. Fiore Godino, already known to us, contracted before the birth of Cayetano, passing the disease to his wife and ultimately to his son. Typical for syphilis are impairments of speech, memory, facial expressions, writing, reading, and weak-minded development. Patients often become excessively irritable and anxious, or in some cases, completely apathetic and indifferent. This at least explains why Cayetano was an absolute zero at school. Literally, he didn't even learn to read and write. He was often transferred to different educational institutions, but he didn't stay long in any of them. He constantly fought with other students and generally had no desire to attend school, not least because he was often bullied by other students there. You know, kids can be quite cruel when they see someone who is different from them. And Cayetano, with his small stature and big ears, stood out quite well. Still, his upbringing did not make him bitter. But what he did show a real interest in was fire, which he often played with on the street, and animals. With fire, despite the danger, there were no incidents to speak of. But with animals, the situation was somewhat different. Cats, birds, and all sorts of creatures that couldn't resist, the boy killed with his bare hands, after which he would hide the remains under his bed. If the Cayetano parents had been a little more concerned about how their son spent his free time on the street, things might have turned out differently. But it happened as it happened. The seeds of evil began to grow from little Cayetano Godino as early as the beginning of 1904, when he was only 7 years old. It all started with an innocent prank, which he played on the yard boy Miguel de Paula. But in order to get it, he had to go to an unusually desolate place where there were practically no adults. Little Miguel rushed after Cayetano in anticipation of treats and sweet victory, but got something else instead. As soon as they were alone, Godino immediately began to beat the little boy for no apparent reason. It's hard to imagine how it all could have ended if a policeman hadn't been passing by at that moment, who, seeing Cayetano throwing the lifeless body of Miguel into a pile of garbage, shouted for him to stop and stayed at the scene. The cop took both kids to the station, but he didn't know what to do with them next. After all, they're just kids, right? There was neither an investigation nor a trial. The man simply clicked his heels together, said there was a terrible racket outside, and that there was no reason to worry. Caetano didn't receive a single punishment, and that same evening he was already wandering the streets of Buenos Aires again. The following year, in 1905, he used the same scheme again, proposing to Anna Neri for the second time. The little girl agreed to go with Caetano to a secluded place in order to receive the reward. But there was no reward. He immediately began to beat her. Indeed, this time he acted more confidently and not just with bare hands. He took a large stone and began to hit the girl on the head with it. And again, the witness to all this process was a policeman who was passing by coincidentally. He pulled Caetano away from the unfortunate girl, but just like the first time, he simply let him go. You see, the policeman failed to recognize a potential serial killer in the little boy. Due to this recklessness, Caetano committed his first murder in 1906. Indeed, on March 29, 1906, 9-year-old Caetano committed his first murder. The victim, a little girl named Maria Rosa Feist, was only 3 years old. The scenario was eerily similar to all previous attempts of Caetano's murders. But this time there was no adult who could stop him. Having lured the girl onto the streets of Rio de Janeiro, which you can see on the screen right now, Godinho began to torment her with his cruelty. He tried to kill her quickly, but it turned out to be a more complicated task than he thought. Maria was scared and lost, but she didn't want to die. And with a heavy heart, Caetano tried to suffocate her, dug an improvised grave in the ditch, and buried the still living girl there. That same evening, Maria's parents reported her missing. And they searched for her, the police did, and the entire girl's family, but to no avail. Moreover, this mystery would remain unsolved for many years until God himself intervenes in the matter. Remember this moment, because we will return to it later. Thus, Caetano's hands were already stained with blood, although no one knew about it yet. The suspicion that his father had, who found dead animals under his son's bed, and at least knew that he had a propensity for cruel behavior. The father was unaware of the officially adopted attacks and killings of other children. At some point after finding the improvised pet cemetery, Mr. Godinho Sr. beat his son and then took him to the police to have him arrested. Here are some quotes from the protocol drawn up that day. Fioro Godinho, Italian, age 42. He stated that he has a son named Caetano, an Argentine, aged 9 years and 5 months, who absolutely does not obey his parents' upbringing and constantly disturbs all neighbors, throws stones, and swears. Trying to somehow correct this, Fioro turns to the police so that they would detain his son for as long as necessary. Indeed, Caetano was behind bars, for the first time, mind you, but not for long, just 2 months, after which he was released and never returned to school. He gradually entered this charming underworld and often started to hang out on the streets, so to speak. The boy's parents failed to devise clever solutions to the issue. When he got carried away with excessive masturbation, his father again reported him to the police to have his son arrested again. Did they really get arrested for that? Well, obviously, in the early 20th century in Argentina, they did. As I've already said, Caetano didn't quietly do this at home, but on the streets for everyone to see. This, of course, outraged people. The guy got into trouble again, not due to his antics, but because of his manic laughter, as funny as it sounds. He was released 2 months later. On September 9th, 1908, he again couldn't resist his urge to kill. The place of the crime, an abandoned warehouse. The victim, Severino Gonzalez Escalero, deceived with a lollipop. This time, the killer decided to bury the boy in a pit for horses. However, during this process, a local resident heard the sounds of struggle and ran out onto the street to see what was happening. I don't know, maybe just nobody could think that a little child could really be killed. Caetano said that he wanted to save the child at all costs, while Severino wanted the scary woman in the black dress, who had already disappeared, to stop. And the adults believed him, or rather conducted a special investigation in search of this mysterious woman. But her traces, as you might guess, were not found. But in 6 days, Caetano burned the mute with a cigarette, a hooligan, and again destroyed the punishment. When the mother of the child arrived, hearing her cry, Caetano was already far away. In addition, the neighbors again began to complain that Caetano is doing something on the street, fighting and beating other children. On December 9th, the mothers resorted to already familiar methods to them. At the age of 12, they sent their son to the correctional colony Marcos Paz, where he spent not a couple of months, but a whole 3 years. Behind bars, he even learned to write and read a bit, But that's all. He didn't change much more. It seems to have gone in the wrong direction because it suggests that the colony only hardened and prepared the boy for future crimes, which did not stop. On December 23, 1911, Kaitanu was released. During this period, he began to suffer severe headaches, which he drowned with unrestricted alcohol consumption, which in turn provoked even more aggression, resulting in new crimes. Remember, I said that Kaitanu loved to play with fire? On January 17, 1912, when he was already 15, the boy set fire to one of the warehouses on Corrientes Street. The police quickly tracked down Kaitanu, who surprisingly didn't even deny his involvement in the arson, even bragged about it. When asked why he did it, he practically responded with a motto. Here's the quote: "I like watching firefighters work, especially how they struggle with the fire." Dear viewers, despite the seriousness of the video, I can't help but chuckle, knowing that Captain Kaitano is still alive.
I like how it burns, how people panic and firefighters arrive. People are in shock, their eyes bulging, and I find it amusing.
Couldn't even blink. But after the interrogation, as no one was hurt and the fire was successfully extinguished, they let me go, which apparently is karma, because just 9 days later, he killed another child. On January 26, 1912, Godina brutally killed 13-year-old Arthur Larora, after which he strangled him with a rope. This murder also remained unsolved for several years, during which Cayetana continued to kill. On March 7, 1912, he simply burned 5-year-old Reina Vanikov on the street. In fact, this happened in front of the whole street, but no one suspected Cayetana as he did it. The girl was just standing near the store and looking into the window. She had her favorite doll with her, which she hugged at any moment, and Godino, unnoticed, sneaked up from behind. I don't know what material the doll was made of, but it seems that the girl was scared, as if she was burned. Little Reina's scream drew the attention of the entire street, including her grandfather, who was across the street at another store. He rushed to save his granddaughter, ran out into the street, into the busy part, and was immediately hit by a car. To death, it was some kind of shock, especially for this family. At the same moment, a policeman who was nearby rushed to help the falling girl. He put out the burning clothes, but it was too late. The child's body had suffered severe burns. After 16 days spent in the hospital, the little girl passed away. As before, no one held Caetano accountable, let alone knew that he himself did it. He didn't stop either. In November 1912, he tried to kill Roberto Russo. Then they caught Caetano and even tried to convict him of attempted murder. It would seem that we are wasting a few lives, but no. Paul himself confirmed his involvement using the same model of the razor. He claimed that he was really chasing a boy who he accidentally bumped into while walking down the street. He was released, but within a few days he had killed a child again. 3-year-old Carmen Gatone, who fortunately survived. During the attack, a guard heard screams and ran to help. This probably saved the girl's life. Indeed, Godino was still there when the man arrived to intervene. Perhaps if the boy had been a bit smarter, he would have stopped at this point and tried to cover his tracks. But obviously, his urge was so strong that he couldn't do that. On December 3, 1912, the most brutal and notorious murder of Caetano Godino took place. Having spotted a group of boys playing on the street, Caetano decided to join them. Caetano approached and invited the kids to play marbles together. They didn't object. Later, using a tried-and-true scheme with marbles, Caetano convinced the 3-year-old Gesualdo Jordan to go with him to the abandoned building on Quinta Moreno. But upon reaching the building, the little boy got scared and refused to go inside. Then Caetano grabbed the marbles and began to use force. He dragged Gesualdo to the building, threw him on the ground and pressed his knee, after which he began to tighten his belt, which he wore like a strap on his waist. If you're only listening, I recommend viewing the video to see a photo of Caetano with one of his tourniquets. Then Caetano no longer had the strength to suffocate the child, and he began to think about how to kill her otherwise. He tied the girl's legs, arms, and mouth with construction ties in search of a new method of execution. At that moment, Father Gesualdo was passing by the abandoned building in search of his son. Moreover, he even returned from Caetano. But he calmly told the man, who didn't know where his son was, to go to the police because with him, everything that is late can be. Finding a 10-centimeter nail and a stone on the street, Caetano returned to his victim. He drove the nail into little Jesualdo's skull, brutally. Driving the last seconds of life with a stone, Caetano watched as the boy died. Only a few moments later, Father Jesualdo found the body of his dead son. That same evening, Godinot came to the memorial of the deceased child. Nobody paid him any attention, yet many people came to say goodbye to the little boy. Later, Godinot would say that he just wanted to check if the flowers were still in his head. But this time, the police acted better. And the very next morning, on December 4th, 1912, Caetano was arrested as the only suspect. They found a newspaper clipping about the murder of Jesualdo and remnants of Jaguda, who coincided with those found on the victim's body. He behaved calmly and did not even admit his involvement in the crime. Moreover, he confessed to all other crimes he committed from 1906 to 1912. And only then everyone found out who killed little Maria Feiss. The police reopened the case and went to the crime scene, where Caetano said there should be a makeshift grave for the girl. But her body was never found. Instead, a double-story building was erected at the burial site, the residents of which did not allow the search for the body, which on one hand made sense, but it also meant the destruction of part of the building. On the other hand, it's not very nice, as every rank of them was hovering over the remains of the buried girl. The news of Caetano killing nearly 4 children shocked not only the whole town, but the entire country. On February 4th, 1913, Caetano was sent by court decision to the Delis Mercedes Hospital for the treatment of mentally ill offenders. After medical examinations, the judge declared him insane due to mental deviations, and the case was closed. Here are some excerpts from medical conclusions about Godinot's mental state. He is an imbecile or a degenerate, instinctively violent, extraordinarily dangerous to those around him. Caetano's old habits remained after moving. He attempted to murder 2 disabled individuals again. One was tied to a bed and the other to a wheelchair. After this incident, Caetano's case was reopened, and on November 12, 1915, he was finally sent to jail. There, quite eloquent speeches were taken from Caetano. For example, in 1927, when in the prison hospital under the guise of pseudoscientific research, with the help of the then Italian doctor Cesare Lombroso, Godinot underwent an operation to reduce his ears. Why? Well, because it was believed that the ears themselves were the source of all the evil in Godinot. Oh, that's early 20th century medicine for you. Also, during the time of the Caetano era, he saved a cat's life by throwing it into a fire. This cat was beloved by many others who were imprisoned, something Caetano didn't understand. They would often retaliate against him, which led to frequent fights. Among other things, Caetano was subjected to sexual abuse. In short, his days in prison were quite miserable, to the point that he had no friends at all. Not a day in prison, not beyond its walls. No one came to him and no one wrote to him. He died in prison at the age of 48 on November 15th, 1944, under mysterious circumstances. The official cause of death was internal bleeding caused by a gastrointestinal perforation. Given his position in prison and constant beatings, it can be assumed that the bleeding was caused by something else. Dear ones, if you've watched this video up to this second, you know you're the best. I really appreciate it. Unbelievable, and a rigged competition. I see that some of you often throw my videos into TikTok, and some even get millions of views on them. I'm not against it, it's just wonderful, but it would be even cooler if you would credit the author. Blessings, or just want to write. Blogmaster, to motivate you a little, I'll do whatever. Among all those who pour clips from my video into the world of TikTok with the hashtag Blogmaster, it's scary. Here's such a minimum: once a month, I will choose a person who will give his merch. You can do the same with Reels on Instagram. Well, that's all. It was Vusanya with you. Let's meet in the next week, if the video is not limited by YouTube, because it happens, and then you have to wait a bit until it is checked. While you're here, watch this video or this one. That's all, explain.